have two assignments, right, for this course. Each assignment is 50% of your total mark. Um, there are 4 learning outcomes which we are trying to evaluate. Critically evaluating leading edge project management theories and practices, demonstrating a critical understanding of risks within a project management context. So when it comes to project management theory and practices, we've been discussing so far, and there are, like, not next week, probably week after, we would talk about agile, and with regard to agile, we would talk about different other project management methodologies, and we would do a comparison. So that would be covered in the coming weeks in more depth. Risk management we spoke about last week. I think you all have a good understanding about risk management now. Then third learning outcome, analyze and evaluate a business case in order to inform project management decision making. uh, Again, like, this also you have been doing. You created a project charter, you have understood the business case, you, based on the business case, you taken necessary steps in order how to launch the project and all that. Again, like, with regard to this, if you have any questions, like, we can discuss in the future as well. Fourth learning outcome, solve project planning, budgeting, tracking, and change problems using MS Project throughout life cycle. We've done the planning bit. Budgeting and tracking we will be doing in the future also. So with regard to budgeting, there are different techniques like earned value management uh, techniques, which would give you an idea as to where you are in terms of timeline, in terms of cost spending in your project. So we will be discussing that in further detail, like, probably next week as well. But that's our fourth learning outcome. Then fifth one, communicate clearly and professionally project plans, costs, benefits, and risks throughout the project life cycle. Again, throughout the sessions, we are, like, discussing this in group activities and in class with regard to different process units. So by the time we complete our, like, schedule, you should have a good understanding about how you would do this communication professionally. Now, you have one group assignment. So this is the task one, which is a group assignment. Um, so basically what you need to do is, like you created last week, like you created week before, you would have to create a set of slides, um, and you would have to do a presentation for 15 minutes. And then we would spend about another 10 minutes on questions and answers, right? So what do you need to do for your group activity? Um, there are 10 projects here, right? Private property construction, commercial property construction, road development project, um, rail line installation, airport construction, a major event like a festival, exhibition, something like that, a stadium construction, uh, a prestige building construction. You're doing an IT system for a private sector, IT system for a public sector. Likewise, we've covered a breadth of area, like, uh, where you can have multiple projects, where you can come up with different examples or different case studies with regard to these areas. And then first thing, you should select a project from one of these areas, right? Once you selected a project, with regard to that project, you have 5 objectives. First one, you need to define the project goals and success criteria of the project. Now, when we do the when we did the example where, like, some of you did a uh, building construction for cancer hospital, right? What is the project goal? You have a set date. By that date, you are supposed to um, build the new wing for the cancer hospital with X amount of beds, which facilitates certain number of patients and all that. So that was your project goal. What is the success criteria of that project? Completing the project within the original baseline budget, which is again like y amount of dollars. Completing the project on the given timeline, so you can agree on a timeline upfront. Then on a business case, ability to accommodate this amount of patients on a recurring basis, right? So that's your business project goal and success criteria. Then based on that, you're supposed to create a work breakdown structure. Again, we did a similar activity in class, right? So we did a work breakdown structure for the cancer hospital as well as the concert in order to raise funds. So we've done two examples from the 10 projects given here, right? Then you need to talk about the project management priorities, right? For example, uh, if you take a project like you need to host an Olympic event on a particular date, what's the highest priority do you think? Naif?
I
Forget
think
Olympic Games,
marketing,
marketing. Why would you say
yeah,
marketing?
because considering the investment, like the whole point, I guess, would be for them to recover that significant portion of investments and
Okay,
also generate a profit.
all right. Uh, One way to look at it, definitely. Now, if you look at it from a project manager's perspective, right? So
Yeah.
project manager is given a certain amount of budget to play with, certain amount of timeline, certain amount of resources uh, that he needs to deliver the project. Now, if you look at that concert where you are fixing a date and having a concert, what's the highest priority for you as a project manager?
Yeah. Being able to complete the venue and get the venue ready in time within the budget.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. So, yes, within the budget, all that comes into play. But if you take that concert project, I would say the topmost priority would be meeting the timeline. Because once you communicate, once you print on your tickets that you're going to host a festival or a music concert with BNS on 31st of December 2020 at Nelumpokuna. Once you put it out, once you start publishing that, there's no turning back. You would have to meet that timeline at any cost. Yes, now with regard to cost, it would become secondary. Now, you might realize closer to the deadline, you're not meeting the timeline. You would put extra resources at additional cost. You wouldn't mind as long as you meet the timeline. So, in that project, as a project manager, timeline is the most critical factor. Now, if you take a step back, if you look at a system development, you are developing a healthcare system to to support terminal patients, right? So you're doing a system, let's say with Siemens. Siemens have this medical equipment which monitors heart rate, which monitors oxygen levels of patients, and it would automatically create alarms and triggers in nursing stations, doctors' stations, so that uh, doctors and nurses have real life information, real time information of patients' behavior and all that. So, if you're developing such a system, what would be your topmost priority? Is it meeting the timeline?
I would say seamless integration.
Exactly. So, in other words, we can say quality, right? So, you are expecting a certain functionality from that system. Because of the criticality of that functionality, you wouldn't mind spending a little bit extra. You wouldn't mind compromising your timeline. You wouldn't mind whether it's January 2021 or April 2021, as long as your job gets done perfectly, right? So in that context, your project management priority would change from meeting the timeline, meeting the cost, to looking at it from a cost perspective, looking at it from a scope perspective. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
So depending on the project you select, right? If it's a private property construction, if it's a commercial property construction, if it's a rail line, if it's an airport construction, depending on the project, depending on the type of the project, depending on the nature of the project, depending on the business case, as a project manager, you would have to change your priorities. You would have to prioritize certain things over other things. So that is basically what we're expecting from this third question. Define project management priorities. What is your number one priority? What are your number two, number three priorities? Right? So, and it's not like you put in the slide saying, okay, in this project, my number one priority is meeting the timeline. Not like that. You need to justify why meeting the timeline is important. Why is it crucial? At what cost you are meeting the timeline? You need to talk about that. Does that make sense? Any questions there? Okay, moving on.
Yeah, Pasindu, yeah.
Sure, Ishika.
Is the priorities like your milestones or that's different?
uh, in this case, it's not really milestones, right? uh, so when you talk about priorities, you can look at it from two different perspectives. One is a milestone approach, where you would say, in phase one, my priority is to meet the timeline to deliver this portion. In phase two, my priority is to build this on the existing architecture at this cost. My phase two priority is not to exceed budget at all. So you can use that approach. But here, if you really look at a holistic view, and if you say, my project is it's to organize a Olympic game, or it's to organize a music festival, and once I publish the dates, there is no going back on the dates. So my number one priority would be to meet that timeline, because there's a lot of stakeholders who are waiting to participate in the event. There's investment made in scheduling artists availability. There is investment done in bringing the band, reserving the venue. So once you do that, you need to absolutely meet the timeline. Now, you might have had plans to host, create, have this, in a concert, you have events, right? You would get certain uh, guests coming into the concert. You would have certain events, like these dancing items in the concert. You might play around with them, or maybe you have to create the venue ready, in terms of seating, in terms of lighting, in terms of outside vendors to arrange food stalls, and so on and so forth. Those things would become your secondary priorities, right? But your primary priority is to make sure you have the venue, that you can host x amount of people in that venue, and that you have the event launched on that day. uh, if you plan initially for 10 food stalls, you can still go with 5 food stalls. If you plan for comfortable seatings, you can compromise it for amphitheater, where you have concrete slabs, and people would sit and watch there, right? That's okay. But you can't go back on the timeline. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Pasindu.
Okay. So the fourth one is to identify key stakeholders in the project. structure of project management. So when it comes to stakeholders, you have uh, sometimes when you do a project, you have to subcontract things, right? So I'll give you an example. At Camso, we have this massive project ongoing. It's currently ongoing to consolidate all the warehouse into one location. Okay. What it does is that it would bring, we have small warehouses across the island. We would consolidate everything into a warehouse in Negombo. So we are building this big warehouse space there with access engineering. There's a lot of contractors involved. So we've given the construction work to Access. We've given the electrical work to Fenton's. Then IT part is done by another vendor called Winsoft. So likewise, we've distributed. There's a lot of subcontractors, right? Also, there is certain activities done in-house, like when it comes to system installation. That's happening in-house, right? So you need to identify who are your subcontractors, who are your prime partners, and how you're going to manage them. We would talk about that today, actually, right? Then use the material that you have reviewed in this module to identify team members with positions and skills needed to carry out project work. Now, in your project team, not everyone is good at one thing, right? Like, everyone has their pros, everyone has their cons, everyone has their strengths, everyone has their weaknesses. So you can do a SWOT analysis on individuals. You can identify what people are good at. Based on that, you can allocate tasks, right? And also, depending on the work, you can decide, okay, I need these skills in my project. So based on that, you can hire people with those skills. So basically, this part we would cover today during our session. So fourth one is on stakeholder management, identifying stakeholders, preparing a communication plan, all that. Then fifth one is to identify and assess major and minor risks inherent into project. So PESTEL, SWOT analysis, the risk register that we did last week, all of this is covered last week. So basically what you need to do is you need to come up with a PESTEL, you need to do a SWOT analysis, you can come up with a risk register, you can do a qualitative risk analysis, a quantitative risk analysis, and you're covered for this section. And overall, with regard to the project you selected, you need to present these 5 aspects.
Pasindu,
Yes.
how many slides should we limit this assignment to?
You can have 5 slides, you can have 100 slides, as long as you finish it within the 15 minutes. It's totally up to you.
Oh, okay.
But generally, I would say like between 10 to 15, considering you would spend about a minute each slide. Some would go a little bit more. So anywhere between 10 to 15 would be a good amount.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it because this is, I guess, quite a bit of information to be included into it, right?
Yes. So
Yeah.
definitely, like now, when you start working on the group activity and individual assignment, again, I'll be there to help you guys. You can consult me. We can discuss it, as you make progress, right?
Okay.
So sometimes maybe you can have 20 slides even, where you
Mhm.
would skip through some slides faster and you would really spend more time on certain areas which is more important for you, right?
Oh, okay.
So
Makes sense. Yeah.
I can't really say you have to limit it to 20 slides or 10 slides. It's up to you. As long as you present this information within 15 minutes, that's good enough.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Pasindu.
Okay. Any questions on the group activity, guys?
Hi, Pasindu.
Hi, Ashen.
Yeah, I don't know whether this is possible, but is there, can we get a example of a project that is done like this? I mean, assignment
Uh,
to be shown. I don't know whether you can do it.
I'll see because
So we can
I
get not to do it as per that, but like to get a basic idea of how it goes.
yeah, I'll see if there is something which I can share. So give me this week, and we'll see if I can share something with you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Only thing I want from you all is by next week, I want you to come up with your project. So you can say, I'm going to do a railway, or you can say, I'm going to host this festival, or you can say, I'm going to create this building, right? I'm going to do the project to build the Nelum, Nelum Kulna, Lotus Tower. So likewise, you need to come up with your project by next week. You think that's realistic?
Yeah, we've actually picked our project person to our group.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
So if you can drop me a mail with your project, then we can discuss and scope the project properly. I mean, ideally that project should not be of it shouldn't be very small. It shouldn't be very large either. So we'll try to scope the project with you guys. Once you have the project, we can have a discussion.
Okay, sure. We'll try to mail it to you maybe today or tomorrow.
All right, cool.
Thank you.
Pasindu, I've got another question.
Okay.
Part 2 is to do the
Yes.
WBS. Are you looking for that? Remember, we did a table with like 1.1,
Yeah.
1.1, or is it okay if we do it in the diagram? Because
No,
I don't know.
I would.
Mhm.
Okay. I would. When it comes to this WBS, I'm looking at a table.
And that table, remember we did with resources, cost. We had like
Exactly.
a table. You're looking for that table, is it?
Exactly. So that WBS, Yanushka, we would we would start the WBS at the scope level to granularize activities, but as we go along, we will add on to that WBS. So today we are discussing stakeholders. So when we are talking about stakeholders and human resources, we would add resources to that WBS. Then when we are talking about cost, we would add cost to that WBS. Likewise, we would improve that WBS. So uh, the diagram is basically the task hierarchy, right? Where we have three levels and we have different tasks, different granular tasks of each level. So rather than that, the table makes more sense here. But a very good question. Does that answer your question, Yanishka?
Yeah, I'm just thinking like explanation wise, do you mind if we do both? So we have the structure drawn, like the hierarchy structure, so we can explain through that and then sort of like shift
Yeah,
through the other slides to explain like the cost breakdown. Because if not, I feel like the table with like the values would not really make sense, I guess,
okay.
when you just look
Sure,
at it.
sure. Can do that. Can do that. Definitely.
Okay.
So you can have that for information so that someone who would look at it would understand that you know the concept, but in the presentation maybe you can skip through it quickly, giving a high level overview.
Okay.
Okay, all good. Any other questions?
Pasindu, can you share your email address so we can contact you?
Sure.
Please. Yeah.
1 minute, I'll put it in chat. I
Yes.
thought I shared it with all of you.
I'm sorry, maybe I did not receive it.
No worries, no problem. I just put it on chat. I put it to Jeremy. I don't know why. Okay. You should all have it now.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So you guys are good with this, right? I can move on to individual assignment. Okay. Let's move on to the individual assignment. Do you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, okay. So again, same thing. You can select a project. Again, like I would want all of you to communicate what project you are doing by next week, so that we can work on the project together. Now, in the individual report, right, what we're expecting is for you to come up with a project charter which describes the overall project objectives. So in class, you guys did a project charter. So it's something similar to that. So you don't need to put it in a PowerPoint. You can have it in a Word
Oh, my speaker is not
document.
working.
And
Oh, okay.
sorry, Yanushka?
Oh, no, wasn't me.
All right, okay, good. Um, so first thing is for that project, you need to come up with a project charter. Again, we did a project charter together as a group activity in class, so it should be very straightforward. Then
Whose speaker is not working? My one.
Which laptop?
Hiru, you can go on mute maybe. Okay. Second task is identify and discuss the methods of project planning and project control that can be used. Now, when it comes to project planning and project control, what do I mean by project planning and control is how you plan activities, right? It's not just saying, okay, my planning is basically to have a meeting with the vendor, have a meeting with my customer, agree on the timeline, and deliver the project in that timeline. No. That's not my project planning. So, what I'm expecting as project planning is how you're going to plan your scope. So, when it comes to scope planning, you would have blueprinting sessions, you would have discussions with the customer, you would agree upon the baseline scope, right? So we spoke about requirements, we spoke about scope. Not everything in your requirements become your scope, right? So based on the requirements, you would prioritize the requirements based on the available money and timeline. You would agree on a specific scope. That's your scope planning. What are the tools you're going to use for scope planning? You would have meetings, you would have expert judgment, you would have brainstorming sessions. Okay. Now, same way, you have to do your cost planning. How would you do your cost planning? How would you arrive at your baseline budget? What techniques, what tools you're going to use for cost planning? Um, there you can talk about estimates. There are different kinds of estimates: top down, bottom up, parametric, likewise, which we discussed already. So that's on your planning. Then you can talk about time planning, schedule planning. How you agree on a timeline? What are the activities you would do? How you ensure quality planning? Are you going to build quality in, or are you going to do an audit at the end of the project? What is the advantages? What are the disadvantages? So that's your planning activity. Then when it comes to control, how are you going now? In planning, what you would do is you would agree on a baseline. You would tell, my project needs to be delivered in $10,000. That's your baseline budget. My project needs to be delivered in 1 year. That's your baseline schedule. My defect rate should be less than 0.5%. That's your quality baseline, right? So based on those baselines, as you go along in the project, you need to put controls. How would you do the controls? When it comes to scope, you would have periodical reviews in order to see, now 1 month is gone. Have I completed 1/12 of the project, 1/12 of the scope? So there is something called uh, schedule performance index and cost performance index, which allows you to monitor your performance against the timeline and your performance against the budget. Based on that, you can take certain corrective actions or reactive actions. So project control is basically if you are not covering the scope that you are supposed to cover in a particular amount of time, what actions you're going to take. Are you going to put more resources? Are you going to add more experts? Are you going to ask people to work overtime? Different things. Okay, so those are your control aspects. So when it comes to scope, time, cost, quality, risks, all you have control aspects. What are the controls you're going to use? That's your project control. Any questions on this? Okay, I assume no questions. Then we would talk about environmental scanning audit to evaluate risk factors. This is nothing but what we did last week, coming up with a solid risk register. What are your risks? What is your risk response? What is your contingency plan? What is your mitigation plan? Who is the risk owner? What's the risk exposure? All that. We've done this. Fourth one, a comprehensive resource plan and a budget for the project. So this is nothing but your WBS. You can have the WBS and you can cover this also in your WBS. Who's going to do what? What's your ASCII? What's your budget? How is your budget derived at? All that information. Fifth one, provide a detailed work breakdown structure which takes into account of the needed timeline and budget for the project. So fourth one and fifth one overlaps, right? So basically, if you do a comprehensive WBS, both these points are covered. Sixth one, create a detailed Gantt chart. So Gantt chart, again, I think we did a Gantt chart, right? With regard to the concert and the construction work, where we come up with a timeline. So basically, you need to come up with a timeline, a Gantt chart. You can either use Microsoft Project or you can use Excel to come up with that Gantt chart. Then you need to create a network diagram, PERT diagram, right? So network diagram is basically understanding your early start, early finish, late start, late finish. Based on that, understanding your critical path. Then last item is discuss what project management methodology and tools can be used to implement the project. When it comes to methodologies, you have multiple methods of project management: waterfall, iterative, agile. When it comes to agile, you have Scrum, you have Kanban, different variations, right? So this we have not yet covered, but we will be covering in the coming weeks. So that and the tools. When it comes to tools, you have Jira, you have Microsoft Project, you have Trello, you have Excel, a whole lot of tools. So you need to discuss these things. And especially in this part, I would expect you to read about it and you need to support what you're saying with literature as well. Does that make sense, guys? Do you have any questions in the individual assignment?
Not at the moment.
All right, cool. So I'm sure when you start working on this, Anishka, you might have questions. So what I would ask you to do is probably start early, so that you have enough time to, like, have a discussion with me and maybe correct it, do necessary, like, actions to get it aligned, and even, like, after the classes, or even you can drop me an email, and I'd be happy to help with any clarifications. Okay. If any one of you has any questions, we can discuss it now also. If not, we can wrap it up, this part of the lecture, and we can start stakeholder management. All right. So give me a minute, guys. I'd try to share the slides. Give me a couple of minutes, and we'll start stakeholder. Guys, do you see my screen?
Also, one small question. Uh,
Yes, Ashay.
all the four groups have to do different projects.
Of course. That's
Uh,
why I want you guys to come up with the projects. And I want individual projects also to be different.
okay. All right.
So, I mean, for example, two groups can do a festival organization. So one can do like a SARC festival organization in Colombo, another can do a musical festival organization. So only thing I'm looking at, that's why I said, like, let's by next week give me your project proposals, so that we can have a discussion to make your project unique.
No, what I wanted to know was, Pasindu, in that list, there was private property. For example, the first thing was
Oh, yeah.
private property. Yeah. So
Yes.
one team had already selected that. Can we also select that?
Yeah, sure. But only thing, again, like, when you say private property construction,
Oh,
like,
okay.
give me a proposal. Is it like are
Oh,
you planning to create a private building, or are you planning to do a different sort of a private property? So restaurant kind of a thing. Based on that, we can scope it in a way which would make it unique.
okay, okay. Got it. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. So today we are going to talk about stakeholder management, right? You guys can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Pasindu.
All
Yes,
right,
Vasit, yes.
great. Um, So when it comes to stakeholder management, I'm going to talk about two concepts. One is human resource management and project stakeholder management, right? What is human resource management? What do you think is human resource management?
Managing the personnel that you are responsible for.
Yes, managing the personnel that you're responsible for. So what like when you say managing the personnel that you are responsible for, what do you mean by managing the personnel? Is it like, making sure that you get the work done? Is it, what is it? What is
This
that
would,
management?
I guess, start off with the hiring and then organizing initial training, the salaries.
Okay. Okay. So yes. So I'm working in SAP. So we have this HRM, human resource management process known as hire to fire, right? Uh, it has changed from hire to fire to hire to retire now. So basically, from recruiting to the time that, like, a person leaves the organization, how you would manage that employee is your human resource management plan. It is beyond like beyond hiring someone, uh, beyond negotiating salary, and like doing the exit interviews and letting someone go, right? There's a lot more to human resource management, especially in terms of project management context. Now, if you really look at people in a project, you would not, it's very rare that you would get an ideal fit for a particular project, right? So one very important part of human resource management that we will be discussing today is on uh, one, training and grooming. So how would you get a particular resource and groom that person for the requirement that you have in your project? What are the techniques you would use? Then the other part, a project manager would work mostly is on the motivational side of things. How would you get the maximum out of your team to deliver what you need to do at the end of the day, right? So those are the two aspects we will be discussing in depth today. But obviously, when you talk about human resource management, it's beyond that. It talks about how we are going to align hiring with your organizational vision, how we are going to train people, how we are going to have a reward and compensation system, uh, how you're going to be successful with the people that you're hiring, what are your strategic alignments. Are you in a are you looking at hiring people and getting work done, or are you into subcontracting and getting things done? So different approaches are there with regard to human resource management. So some definitions as such, right? Project human resource management includes the process required to make the most effective use of people involved in a project. So basically, as I said, uh, here we would talk about the grooming aspect and motivational aspect. This is a very interesting area for me, because it has lot to do with psychology. It has lot to do with how people behaviors, right? So I find this area very fascinating, uh, and this is a particular area which is of great interest to me personally. Now, when it comes to human resource management, we would talk about three key things. One is organizational planning, right? So when I was working at Virtusa, we had this team structure, which is called the pyramid, right? So for us, each project was a separate organization. So project manager is like a CEO of that organization. And a part of it is to maintain this pyramid structure. What do I mean by pyramid structure? So in a project, you have people of different skills and different levels. Um, so we have tiers: T0, T1, T2, T3, likewise. What we generally do is we have an expert. We have about a one expert or half expert. Sometimes we have the key resource being shared across multiple projects. Architect, it can be a technical architect, it can be a functional architect, likewise. Then under him, we have someone who's not an expert, but who has that who is strong in technical. We call them leads. So we have a good technical lead or a senior software engineer. And then under the technical lead, you have a couple of senior software engineers, 3, 4 maybe. And under senior software engineers, you have a bunch of software engineers and associate software engineers. So basically, what this does is it 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 formulates a training environment. So basically, this T0 guy overlooks everything. He's an expert. He has a lot of experience. With that, he can, at a high level, at 36,000 feet above, he can tell, okay, something's going wrong or something's going right, or this person is not doing what he's supposed to do, or things like that at a high level. Um, so under him, the team grooms, and then you have someone who's not as experienced as this fellow, but someone who's less experienced, but who is strong in his technical skills or the domain skills, who would manage the project at a granular level. He would assign the work to the senior software engineers, the team leads, and would look at it from a module aspect. So is this module done? Is that module done? Likewise. And then these guys, the T2 guys, right? They would look at it from the module aspect, right? So they, in their own module, they would go into depth. Right? So for example, let's say you're building a website. So um, this T1 fellow would say, okay, website has a login page. You're supposed to do the login page. Website has a shopping cart. You're supposed to do the shopping cart. Website has a user registration. You're supposed to do user registration, right? So 3 modules are divided among 3 senior software engineers. And then this senior software engineer with his team, couple of guys, maybe 2 or 3, he would go into nitty-gritties of that login page. This guy would go into nitty-gritties of the shopping cart. This guy would go into nitty-gritties of the user registration. So in another sense, they would only know about this particular module, right? So also these junior guys would be trained under the senior engineer. Senior engineers would be trained under the tech lead. Tech lead would be trained under the architect. So it's one structure, right? So there is no right structure, there is no wrong structure. So this is something which has worked in the past for me, and it's something which I'm trying to adapt today also in my organization. Then second aspect is staff acquisition. are you going to hire the perfect fit at a higher cost? Now, one thing you need to understand, your HR process does not um, end with hiring people, right? Give me a minute, guys. It does not end with hiring people. Once you hire someone, that person becomes your baby. You need to make sure that they have a proper career growth, that they are motivated in their work. That they're motivated with the work, that they find it challenging. So you need to ensure that your people that you hire are happy with your job. So staff acquisition also plays a major role. You generally, what I would do is, if I have a requirement, I would look at the attitude of a person and see if that person can learn things, can adapt to the organization. And based on that, I will have at least 2 to 3 year plan for that resource. And based on that only, I would make the hiring. Then third aspect is team development. So once you hire someone who is not the perfect fit, um, but who is a potential fit, you need to do the development. So you need to arrange trainings, you need to groom that person, all that, right? Sometimes one thing I've realized now is, especially with regard to the Sri Lankan culture, people people fancy the classroom trainings. uh, in North America, they would like virtual trainings. Today, now, after COVID-19, in Sri Lanka also trend is shifting slowly. But again, how you are going to do the development? Are you going to do in-house training? Are you going to perform on-the-job training? What is it you're going to do? So for that, you need to have a plan also. So what, um, with regard to team development, we have this 70-20-10 rule. Okay, what is 70-20-10? Does anyone know the 70-20-10 rule? Hmm? Has anyone heard of 70-20-10 rule? Naif?
No.
All right. So basically what 70-20-10 rule says is 70% of the tasks that you need to know, you should learn on the job. This is 70 is on the job training, right? While you're doing the task, you learn. With experience, you would learn how to do it better. This is 70% of your learning. 20% is peer learning. That is, now, let's say you are a software engineer. So 20% of the tasks you can learn from your peers. You can talk to each other. You can talk to your leads. Based on that, you can acquire 20% of this knowledge. 10% is customized personal training. So it can be a classroom training, it can be a particular certification, likewise. So this is also a good way to allocate your training budget in order to understand how you're going to do the training. Again, there's no right wrong answer here. It's just how you're going to do it. So why human resource management is important? Now, if you look at a project, right, what does project manager do? This, like, let's take a construction project for an example. Does the project manager help build the walls? No. Does he help build the roof? Not really. Project manager coordinates and makes sure job gets done at the end of the day. So people determine the success or failure of that project. So it's important that you manage your human resources. Secondly, whatever, people believe, today we have a severe lack of skilled resources. I've worked in different industries. So when it comes to MAs, we have a big problem with regard to skilled workers, skilled machine operators. Um, Here at CAMSO, we are trying very hard to retain our, shop floor employees who are making tires for us. It's a niche thing in a way. And also, once you hire someone, you do a significant investment on them. And if someone is to go, even the most skilled person might not be 100% productive the day we hire them. So it takes some time for him to get used to the environment, to the tools, to the people. So because of that, it's important to manage your resources, manage what you have within the organization. Ultimately, the main goal of human resource management for me is to ensure that you have the right person at the right place at the right time, right? So that's the main goal of human resource management for me. With regard to human resource management, there are four main aspects. One is understanding behavior. So with regard to understanding behavior, each individual has different traits. You have uh, constructive team roles, we have destructive team roles. uh, if you work across geographies, you would see how different people react, how different people work and behave. uh, so understanding behavior is very important. I mean, um, while I was at Virtusa, I did a project with a technology called AS400. Anyone who is in the banking sector would know what is AS400 is. It's a very niche technology. We didn't have enough skilled resources in Sri Lanka, so we had to hire some people from India. We had to get them over to Sri Lanka to get the project done. The main problem I had with them is their fear to say no. Whenever, as a project manager, I ask, can you meet the timelines? Can you do this project in 3 months, 6 months? They would always say yes. They would never say no. That's part of the Indian culture, I guess, right? When it comes to US counterparts, they will bluntly say to your face, but that's it. Once you have the conversation, next moment, how harsh your conversation may be, next moment, they are back to your best friend, right? So it's very, they have a very professional environment. In Sri Lanka, we give more prominence, we give more value to the relationships. Even at work, sometimes I've seen situations where people are afraid to send an email thinking the other party might get hurt because of that email, right? So different people react differently. It's important as a project manager you understand how each individual behaves, what ticks them, what motivates them. Second aspect is motivation. Now, with regard to motivation, there are a lot of interesting theories. We would talk about Maslow's hierarchy of need. We would talk about Herzberg's hygiene theories. So there's a lot of theories with regard to motivation. Again, very interesting area. uh, each individual would be motivated differently. Some would be motivated for money, higher paycheck. Some would be motivated for challenging work. Some would be motivated for appreciation. Likewise, each individual's motivation is different. Based on that, you need to understand how you can motivate your team to get the work done. Third aspect is influence and power. Especially with regard to stakeholders, we will talk about how influence and power works. Uh, how influence and power works over time. We will talk about that. Right. Then finally, the effectiveness. As a project manager, you need to constantly monitor the effectiveness of the task, effectiveness of your approach on your people. So again, we would talk about this in control aspect. Any questions, guys, up until now? Is it all clear?
Yeah, okay.
All
All
right,
good, all good, Pasindu.
good. Let's move on. So when it comes to theories of motivation, there are a few. We would talk about these ones in detail. First one is Maslow's hierarchy of need. Does any of you know about this Maslow's hierarchy of need?
Yeah.
Naif, would you like to explain what this says?
Basically, go through a process of like motivating the people, right? So
Exactly.
initially, yeah, from very basic needs on to point of where like the it drives the motivation of that person to actually contribute something.
True. So Maslow's hierarchy of need is developed by Abraham Maslow. Um, this this is like very valuable, and I think it is something you can relate. Now, uh, in the roads, you would see people like who would ask for money and all that, right? Um, this talks about the different levels of motivation, different levels of needs a person may have, right? It all what it also says is that if the bottom needs are not met, meeting these top needs does not make any sense. For an example, someone who doesn't have food to eat, water to drink, like someone who's not in his best health condition, if you give him a fancy house, does that motivate him? No, not really. He would want ends meet. He would want some food. He would want some shelter. He would want some water. The very basic human needs, the psychological needs. Once you have psychological needs only, you can think of uh, giving safety needs, right? So, for example, uh, if you take someone who doesn't have any clothes, any food, any house, uh, if you go to that person and if you try to be a friend to him, if you try to calm him down, if you try to make him feel comfortable as a friend, uh, that wouldn't motivate him. He would want water, he would want food immediately, right? So his psychological needs should be met before any other need. Once you have psychological needs, then comes to safety needs, security of body, employment, having the necessary resources, shelter, all that, right? So again, for an example, if you now when you have food, water, all that, the next level is to have the clothes, employment, have a house, shelter, all that. For someone who who doesn't have shelter and all, if you try to give him a promotion at office, if you try to uh, be a friend, give love and belongings, doesn't really help him that much. So his safety needs should be met before love and belonging. Once your safety needs are met, then comes to love and belonging. So then that person would be motivated by friendship, the family, all that, right? Office relations, all that. Once you have that level of uh, comfortability, then it would come to esteem. What is esteem? Driving a fancy car, uh, having a good designation, all that, right? After esteem, the highest level is self-actualization, right? What does it talks about? It talks about creativity. It talks about problem solving skills. It talks about overcoming challenges. It's that uh, uh, the the feeling that you get when you achieve something good. It's not to build a fancy house or anything like that. It's when you have this problem, when you solve it, it's that feeling you get, right? So Maslow's hierarchy of needs basically says that you need to make sure that the bottom needs are met before you fulfill the top needs. So even in your project team, if you have someone who who doesn't have certain needs, giving him a designation change might not help, right? So that's why I said some people are motivated by a higher paycheck. Because why higher paycheck? They need to build a better house. They need to buy clothes due to different reasons. But someone who has these needs met, if you give him a higher paycheck, that wouldn't motivate him much. For such people, you need to give more responsibilities, a higher designation, more empowerment, things like that. So in a team also, you can apply this uh, law. Are you clear with Maslow's hierarchy of need? Does it make sense to you guys?
Yes.
No questions? All right, we'll move on. Next one is Herzberg's motivational and hygiene factors. Again, what Herzberg tells is basically you have motivational factors and hygiene factors. Right? Motivational factors will produce job satisfaction, right? So these factors will produce job satisfaction. Then you have hygiene factors. These would not provide job satisfaction, right? But if you don't have these hygiene factors, um, that would produce job dissatisfaction, right? For an example, um, if you have a salary, if you increase the salary to a certain level, it would not produce satisfaction. You wouldn't feel satisfied to work as such. But if you don't get the salary that you require, it would create job dissatisfaction. So you need to provide people with the salary that would require them to meet their lifestyle, meet their standard of living, all that. But beyond that, if you increase it further, that would not motivate them further. But if you decrease it, it would demotivate them. More supervision, more attractive workplace, these are not factors that would create satisfaction as such. Now, a clear example, at CAMSO, we used to work at a different location. So as of last year, we got this fancy workplace done. We have a now like a very innovative state of the art workplace with very open seating and all that. So it's a very attractive workplace. But when talking to team, what I understand is it does not provide satisfaction to them. But previous workplace was providing dissatisfaction, right? So lack of hygiene factors would create job dissatisfaction, but improving it further, improving it more than what is required would not make it more satisfactory. When it comes to the motivational factors, this would create job satisfaction, achievement, sense of achievement, recognition, giving responsibility, career advancement, career growth. These would create job satisfaction. They would say, okay, I was a software engineer a couple of years ago, now I'm an engineer. Maybe next year I can be a senior engineer. Likewise. So these would create job satisfaction, right? So Herzberg's motivational theory, what it says is basically uh, the motivational factors will produce job satisfaction. Hygiene factors would not produce job satisfaction, but lack of hygiene factors would create job dissatisfaction. I hope it's clear to all of you. Let's move on. Then you have Viru model, right? This is also known as expectancy theory of motivation. This basically tells is this is the belief that working harder will lead to better performance, right? It talks about three aspects: expectancy, instrumentality, and perceived value. I don't think this is valid anymore. We've moved from working hard to working smart. So this talks about this beliefs that if you work hard, that would lead to better performance. Better performance will lead to better reward, and better reward is the perceived value that people are looking at. So you would put a certain goal, a certain higher paycheck. You would you would ask people to work hard to get that. So organizations today have moved away from this to working smart. It's not about hard work anymore, it's about smart work. Then you have McGregor's theory X, theory Y, and theory Z, right? So McGregor's theory X uh, talks about the negativity, talks about people trying to avoid work, people dislike work. So it looks at workers as they don't like to work, they try to avoid work as much as possible. So managers need to use coercion and direction and control in order to get work done, right? So theory X looks at people as they would tend to naturally avoid work. Again, I don't think it's true anymore. Again, depending on the workforce, depending on the type of work you do, depending on the background of people, you would have to use different theories, right? If you use this for white collars today, you would have a lot of unsatisfactory workforce. But still with certain blue collar jobs like carpentry and things like that, especially in subcontinent, people have this mindset towards work. Theory Y, on the other hand, looks at individuals considering work as a natural thing. things like, in life, you play, you rest, you enjoy work. So same way you look at people enjoying work, and this enjoyment will lead to self-satisfaction and esteem and self-actualization needs. Now, after theory X and Y, which was developed by McGregor, theory is said was developed in 1980s by William Auchi, and it looks at, it talks about people being motivated by um, emphasizing trust, quality, collective decision making, and cultural values. Now, if you really look at, like, certain organizations, like, people would like to work at Google. Is it because they offer a higher paycheck? Not really. It's about the culture, it's about the values they inherit. So, theory set talks about motivating workers by emphasizing on trust, quality, and collective decision making and cultural values. I think today more and more organizations are adapting these kinds of principles, which focuses more on trust and collective decision making concepts. So again, I can relate something very interesting here. Um, Now, if you look at CAMSO, we have blue collar jobs as well as white collar jobs. We have shop floor employees, um, and we have, like, IT savvy, finance related jobs, procurement related jobs, white collar jobs, right? So recently we had to create this um, shift, a shift that would allow people to work on US timeline, right? So ideally, they would come late, they would go late rather than the normal shift. So for the shop floor employees, what we did, we said, okay, we are going to give you additional 10,000 rupees in order for you to work in this night shift. They were motivated, right? They were motivated to do the night shift, start working at night instead of the normal working hours, so that they would get additional 10,000 rupees. Now we had to implement the same thing for IT. We looked at it. We realized increasing 10,000 rupees would not motivate people. Why? According to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, our guys, like, these white collar jobs, they've gone beyond that, like, monetary requirement that they need. So they've gone beyond that. So we had to give them something different in order to motivate them to work in the night shift. So what we told them is, anyone who works in the night shift can work 3 days from office, 2 days at home, which would give them more time with their families to balance the work-life balance, right? So again, um, see, like, different people would be motivated differently. If you say, okay, I'd give you 10,000 extra for you to work at night, they wouldn't come. But the approach we took was different. Because of that, we got more people working on that night shift as well. So in your organizations also, you might have to deploy certain different aspects, thinking about your stakeholders and understanding what's best for them and what motivates them. Does this make sense, guys? Any questions so far? Are you finding it interesting, boring? What do you find it?
Actually, quite interesting.
Interesting.
All right. Cool. Any similar stories that you could relate here? No? All right. Let's move on. Now, as I told, now so far I'm covering the human resource part of it. Okay, I'm not going into the project context as such yet. I'm talking about more on a human resource management point of view. As a project manager, how you're going to manage your team aspect, right? It's important to understand the team roles you have, right? Uh, if you look at your team, you would easily be able to box them into one of these roles. So you have two roles, two types of team players. One is your constructive guys, constructive team. The other team structure is the destructive, right? So first we would talk about the constructive team roles, then we would go to destructive team roles. You have initiators. Initiators are people who would always initiate things. You don't need to go behind them. They would initiate by nature. Also, there are team members who would seek information. Okay, how is this done? What what can we do further? Likewise, they would always seek information. Again, it's a good role. Also, same way you have information givers. So you have information seekers, you have information givers. That balances out your team. Someone always asks for more information. There are also people who would give information. You have encouragers. When these guys you need in a team, sometimes when you hit a roadblock, when you hit your face against a wall, you need your encouragers who would encourage, motivate the team within the team to go and do that, walk that extra mile. Clarifiers, uh, people who would always clarify things. Because of clarifiers, your requirements would be solid, right? So then you have harmonizers. Harmonizers are people who would make sure the uh, team stays as a team, who would harmonize the team. The summarizers. After every meeting, you might see certain individuals would summarize everything. Again, a good role. So these are your good roles in a team, right? These roles. It's if you have these roles, you are lucky in your project team. Same way you have destructive team roles. Aggressive, who would be always aggressive, who would always try to pick a fight, who would always would say no to the customer because they're doing changes. There are blockers who would always say, okay, this is blocked because of that person. I can't move because of that person. Likewise, the blockers. Withdrawers. There are people who would withdraw from the discussion, who would stay isolated, who wouldn't mind whatever happens as long as they get the paycheck at the end of the day. They won't worry. Withdrawers. Attention seekers. Again, you have these people who always wants to be the center of attention. Not a good role in the team to have. Topic jumpers. When you are discussing something, they would always shift from one topic to another to another. Dominators. There are people who naturally dominate meetings. Again, uh, in a team, when you have a team discussion, you need to make sure you need to make everyone feel comfortable, right? So you need to, in that aspect, this also become a certain destructive team role because when you have a dominator, naturally, you have some people withdrawing, right? Then you have devil's advocate. Does anyone know what is devil's advocate?
Yeah, sort of bringing out the controversial topics just for the sake of it.
Okay, exactly.
Seeing it.
Um, Good explanation, Naif, right? So, someone who would always look at the negativity, someone who would always look at the uh, controversial side of things, right? We we put the devil's advocate as a destructive team role, but in literature there are certain articles which considers devil's advocate as a constructive team role. Why would a devil's advocate be a destructive team role? What do you guys think?
I guess it creates unnecessary tension between the team members.
Yeah, it creates unnecessary tension between the team members. It creates additional fear in something. When you try to do something, you would always say, okay, what if this happens, what if that happens? Likewise, uh, it would demotivate the team from moving forward. In that aspect, it becomes a destructive team role. In which aspect it becomes a constructive team role? What are your thoughts? So we know devil's advocate, it's someone who looks at the negativity always. So now my question is, how come a devil's advocate be a constructive team role? What are your thoughts? Yes, Shehan.
By giving strong arguments and
By giving strong arguments, how would that help the team?
you will see the other side, like
Exactly, you will see the other side. I'm trying to get at a particular point. You're almost there, Shehan. Any other suggestions?
It would actually bring to surface some of the things that you tend to forget or not think about initially. Critical thinking, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Critical thinking side of things. So it would surface things that you might not see or might not think. But what does it ultimately surface? So ideally, um, when someone looks at the controversial side of things, the negative sides of things, it they would surface things that you don't necessarily see. In other words, they would point out risks in your plan. Because they point out risks, you can apply mitigation strategies, a risk response plan. As such, if you look at that angle, this becomes a positive team role, right? But generally, because of the motivation side of things, we consider it destructive, right? So there is some debate about whether it's a constructive or a destructive team role, but for this, sake of this lecture, we can consider it destructive. But again, as I said, there are two sides to it. You can look at it from a positive angle where he would highlight risks, he would highlight issues which you don't see. In that aspect, it becomes a supportive role, a constructive role. On the other hand, uh, the way they point out things, it would create demotivation in the team. As such, it would become a destructive team role as well. Moving on, team building and motivation, right? So you have Tuckman's team development model. It has 4 stages, right? As a project manager, as someone who would form a team, this Tuckman's team development model is very important, right? So it talks about 4 different stages: forming, storming, norming, and performing. Forming is when you start the project, when you bring bunch of individuals together to a room and tell them, okay, now onwards you are a team, you are supposed to work in this project as a team. Okay, everyone doesn't know each other. There would be individuals, they're dependent on the project manager, the leader, to do work. They wouldn't talk to one another because they don't know necessarily, right? So in forming stage, as a project manager, you need to spend a lot of time uh, assigning tasks, allocating work, and also, more importantly, doing team building activities or encouraging people to work in pairs or work in groups so that they would get to know each other and they would reach the storming stage. Okay. As forming stage, slowly, you would increase the effectiveness of the work that you do, right? So forming is a very important stage for a project manager to be with the team. After forming, you reach the storming stage. What happens at the storming stage? Can someone tell me? Once you get to know some person, at least to a certain extent, right? You wouldn't know that person fully, but you know the name, you know how he works and all that. Then you started storming stage. There, as you can see, your performance would degrade, your effectiveness would degrade, right? And this is a time where there's a lot of conflicts. Now, if you really look at moment you, if you are going to a new place, first time you went to the new place, like, you wouldn't do much. You would, like, wait for the work assigned to you and you would start working on it. But as you get comfortable, as you get to know a few people, you would see faults in them, right? With that, uh, as a project manager, you would have to do a lot of uh, mediation. You would have, as a leader, you would have to make people focus and keep the focus of the people on the project. This is an area where you would have potentially a lot of conflicts within the team, storming stage, right? Why the conflicts are there? Because they know people to a certain extent, but they don't know well enough. That's the main reason. Again, a lot of team building activities to get them together and to build trust and to make people aware of each other. Once you pass the storming stage, you reaches the norming stage. Okay. Sorry guys, I think I lost the screen share. Give me a minute. Do you guys see my screen?
Yeah, we do know.
Okay. So after the storming stage, you comes to the norming stage. Norming stage is when people understand and people value others for who they are, right? Um, so someone might do something differently, not the perfect way that the other person would want it, but still they would respect that individual for who they are, and they will start working together. This is the norming stage. Now, in norming stage, you don't need to involve much. You need to facilitate. You need to facilitate communication. You need to facilitate collaboration. You need to facilitate teamwork. So as a project manager, you facilitate in the norming stage. People would work together. Performance, the effectiveness increases. And after a while, as time moves on, you would reach the performing stage. Performing stage is when people know each other's weaknesses, strengths, how they are, what they think. Now, this is where the highest effectiveness of the team is, right? Performing stage. Because there is good trust, good bonding within the team. As a leader, you don't need to manage, you don't need to facilitate, you only need to delegate things and oversee. People will start working at a high effectiveness. Again, now this is the ideal stage you need to be as a team. So as a project manager, your task is to make sure that you reach this stage in the minimum time possible. Now again, beyond this, you have a joining state, right? Which is basically when the project comes to an end, you will start releasing people. Because you are letting people go, there is a natural demotivation. You are like, that will drop the performance slightly. Tuckman's team development model talks about these four in particular, so we can stick to these four. But as you start ramping down the team, there is a negative impact on the team, which would reduce the effectiveness to a certain extent. Now, as a project manager, when you start work also, when you plan work also, you need to plan with this in mind. Moment you get someone to the project, you can't expect the full performance from that person. It would take him some time to get to know the tools, get to know the people, get to know the environment for him to work properly. So as he gets comfortable in the environment, his performance would increase, and then you can allocate work as such. Clear? Any questions on this? All right, good. Then we have something called conflict management model, right? There is two main, okay, rather than that, let's say this. There are five major methods of conflict management. One is competition, collaboration, accommodation, avoidance, and compromise. Now, out of these five, two are non-cooperative methods of conflict management. Just because a person did it this way, I also want to do it that way. That's competition. That's not healthy. Uh, just because A did it this way, I'm not going to do anything about it. Let him do. If he wants to do that way, let him do. That's avoidance. Again, it's not cooperative. Both of these are not healthy as such. Then you have cooperative conflict management methods, which is collaboration and accommodation. So collaboration is basically, okay, he's doing that way. Okay, let's help him by doing something which would help him. So that's collaborating. As a team, you would work together to support him. Rather than competition, you would support. That's collaboration. Second one is accommodation. Instead of avoiding, you would accommodate. Okay, that is basically he is doing that way. So if I do it this way, it would help. It would not help him. So I'll change my way. I'll accommodate to facilitate his requirement. That's accommodation. And between all this, you have compromise. Compromise sits in the middle. It's not a. It can be cooperative. It can be non-cooperative as well at times. And also, avoidance and accommodation are non-assertive conflict management models. Competition and collaboration are assertive models, out of which collaboration is the best, I would say. Okay, so in a project team, when it comes to conflict management, you need to understand how each model works and how each people work. And based on that, you need to try and create a win-win situation, which would keep everyone motivated and everyone on their job goals. Now we would talk about stakeholder analysis, right? So now, up until now, what we discussed is from a project team perspective, right? How we are going to manage the team, how you are going to ensure performance of the team and all that. Now, here we would go from HR side of things to stakeholder side of things, from internal to external, slightly. When it comes to stakeholders, your team is your internal stakeholder as well. But now, in this aspect, we would talk about the external parties as well, right? So stakeholder analysis is a process of systematically collecting and analyzing information to determine what motivates your stakeholders and how you can get the maximum out of these stakeholders. Uh, Before talking about stakeholder management as such, it's important to understand stakeholder influence over time, right? So stakeholder influence over time uh, is basically to say what influence a particular stakeholder has on the project over time. So do you agree with this graph, guys? Or do you think this is wrong? Why do you think this is right, if so? Yanishka, any thoughts?
Mm, I think I agree because initially, like while it's being planned, the people would have a lot of influence over it, what they want to do, like what to sort of how to budget it, what to like what capital to put into it and all that. And then towards the end of it, because it's already planned, they're just following through, right? So towards the end of the project, the influence would reduce.
Exactly. Very good explanation, Yanishka. Thank you for that. So basically, like if you take a very basic example, now if you are to build a house, right? Uh, when you go to an architect or a contractor as a customer, right, in the initiation stage, you would say, okay, instead of tiles, I want timber flooring. He would say, yes, sir, of course, we'll do it. Instead of this ceiling, I want this wood ceiling. They would say yes. Uh, for most of these things, they would tend to say yes, and they would be accommodative because you have influence, you have high influence. You can always say, okay, if you can't do it my way, I'm going to another contractor and I'm going to get it done with him. But as you commit, as you sign an agreement, as you start working with them, slowly, your influence would decrease, right? I'm sorry, I put impact of risk. This is actually stakeholder influence. Sorry about this mistake. So it should be stakeholder influence, right? As you commit to the project, as you go along, you won't have that of a say. So towards the end, like, if you go to the contractor and say, like, I want, instead of this style, I want timber flooring, you would say, okay, this is a change, I need to charge you this much, probably, right? So as Yanushka said, in the initial planning stage, you have more power, you have more control, but as you sign it and as you reach towards the end of the project, you just execute the plan and you would have to stick to the plan, and you don't have much of a say, and you don't have much of an influence to change the course of the project as such. So again, this is something that you have to keep in mind, both as a project manager, to understand your influence in the project as well as the other stakeholders' influence of the project as well. So when it comes to stakeholder management, we have a 4-step process, right? Identifying stakeholders, prioritizing stakeholders, understanding stakeholders, and managing stakeholders. This is your Bible to stakeholder management. So first step is identifying stakeholders. So let's say you're doing that concert project, right? You are doing a fundraiser for cancer hospital to build another extend another building to that existing building. So you are doing a concert to organize it. Who are your stakeholders? Ashin, what do you think? Ashin?
Yeah. So the people.
Yeah. So who are the people? What are the roles? So basically, you would have your cancer hospital director, like, who would be one of the major stakeholders, right?
Yeah.
What are the other stakeholders that you would have there? So you're organizing a concert, right? So do you consider people who would come to see the concert as your stakeholders? So they would also become part of your stakeholders, because they're going to pay amount of money for a ticket to come and enjoy a show. So you need to make sure that you would satisfy these viewers, the people who would come to witness the show. So they also become part of your stakeholders. Who are the other stakeholders? Sachini, what do you think?
The band which is presenting.
Exactly, the band, uh, another stakeholder. Who else?
The sponsors.
Sponsors, again, like, they have invested money on the event. Sometimes you would promise them like, airtime. Sometimes you would promise them banners. You would need to make sure that their requirements are satisfied. Who else? Shamit, any other stakeholder?
Who will do the marketing for us, event management company,
Exactly, event management company.
and
So for
security personnel. If you hire security, then they'll be our stakeholders.
exactly, yeah, that day you would need to make sure security, so you would need to hire security personnel. They all become your stakeholders. So you're going to have this event at Lotus Pond, right? um,
Yeah, yeah,
Nelum
correct.
Pokuna. So you need to get the venue, you need to print the tickets. So in that aspect, Colombo Municipal Council would also become a stakeholder. They would have the laws, as in, like, they would tell, okay, 5% of the tickets should go to municipal council. Likewise, there are authority which would enforce certain laws, regulations on how you can have the event. What are the noise levels you can have, until what time you can play. Likewise, so that also become a part of your stakeholders. Do you think, like, if you're having the event in a ground, like, people nearby, would they become your stakeholders as well? Like neighboring houses and all that. If you're having an open air thing, they would also become your stakeholders, because they might get disturbed from the thing you're doing. So they would also become your stakeholders in a way. So first job is to identify your stakeholders. Who are your stakeholders? You need to list them down. That's your first thing. Once you identify your stakeholders, second one is to prioritize stakeholders, right? Now, prioritizing stakeholders it's very important, right? So each stakeholder, you can place them in this power influence grid, right? Some have high power, low interest. Some have high power, high interest. Some have low power, low interest. Some have low power, high interest, right? So um, in this event, in this concert, um, Naif, can you tell me a high power, high interest stakeholder?
I guess the marketing personnel, or rather the primary sponsors, they would want airtime
Exactly.
as well. Yeah.
Primary sponsors, because they've invested a lot. Because of that investment, they are very much interested in the project. And because of that high investment, also they have high power. They would say, okay, instead of this time, I need this airtime. Oh, I need this banner here. Likewise, they can make high demands. So these high power, high influence people, you need to manage closely. Then you have high power, low interest people, right? Who are they? Yanushka, what do you think?
Maybe the security personnel, if you hire.
Why would they have high power?
Mm, okay, maybe not. I don't know.
Okay. What do you think about municipal council? Would they really care about the event?
No,
Not
they
really,
won't.
right?
Yeah.
But they would make sure that you abide by the law. Like, they would get 5% of the tickets, you would adhere to a certain noise level. So they have high power, but low interest. They wouldn't worry much, but you need to keep them satisfied. In other words, you need to make sure 5% of the tickets goes to them. You need to make sure that event happens in a particular timeline. You need to make sure that the seating arrangement is done according to the COVID-19 guidelines, things like that. So you need to keep them satisfied. Then you have low power, high interest people. Who are they? Probably people who are coming to see the show, right? They are paying a certain amount of money to see, like, BNS live, for example. They are very much interested in the show, but they don't have much of a say. They can't change the playlist. They can't change the seating arrangement as such, but they have high interest, low power, right? So you would keep them informed if you are going to do, for example, if Nelum Pakuna has 3 gates, and in that day you are going to get everyone only on 2 gates, you need to keep them informed as part of the game, right? So they are low power, high interest people. Then you have low power, low interest. Probably the security guards, all that would come here. Low power, low interest. You would monitor them. The work, people who are doing the background work to facilitate that, they would not have much power. You would monitor them to get things done, right? Clear? So based on this quadrant, each of these separate group you would manage differently, right? So it would be difficult to manage CEO in a different way, CIO in another way, the senior manager in another way, manage in another way, likewise. But rather than that, you would categorize them into 4 groups, and that would make life easier for you to manage them. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Any questions? Any unclear areas? Okay, let's move on. Now, third one is understanding stakeholders. So in order to understand stakeholders, you need to come up with this stakeholder register, right? So this is stakeholder register. What does it has? Name of stakeholder, designation, department, role in the project, type of a stakeholder, whether external, internal, what type of communication you're going to use. In the project, you need to have status meetings. For example, with a CEO of the company, you would have bi-weekly meetings where you would not go into the granular risks, but you would present him the status at a high level. When you talk about the delivery team, you would go into more granular level where you would go into uh, granular risks. You would talk about more technical things. You would operate at a lower level there. So based on the stakeholder, your approach would be different. What are the expectations from the project? For some people, it would be on-time delivery. Some people, it would be on the budget delivery. For some people, it would be like, doing things right, different things. And then project outcome. What sort of a project outcome that person would hold? Is he an influencer? It is a supporter? Does he is like, has a negative impact? Likewise. So you can ask these questions in order to understand what type of a person he is, what motivates them, how you should manage them, all that, right? So you need to come up with a stakeholder register. So today we don't have much time to do this, do activity as such, to do a stakeholder register or anything like that. But I hope the understanding is clear for you all in terms of coming up with a stakeholder register. So this is part of your assignment as well in stakeholder management, to come up with a stakeholder register. Any questions here, guys? Is it clear?
No. Yeah, clear.
Was it not clear or no questions?
No questions.
Good. For a moment, I was scared. All right, move on. So finally, once first you did identifying stakeholders, then you prioritize them. Thirdly, you understand your stakeholders. Now you need to manage your stakeholders. Managing your stakeholders is basically with the understanding and prioritization, right? So here you prioritize your stakeholders. Here you understand your stakeholders. Based on these two, you come up with an action plan. How you're going to manage each stakeholder, what steps you're going to take, how frequent you're going to have a meeting with them, all that. So this is the action plan. So this is the fourth step, which is managing stakeholders and pretty much rolling out an action plan. Um, is it clear, guys? So this is all I had planned for today. In terms of stakeholder management, I actually thought maybe we could do a classroom activity, but we spent some time going through the assignment and understanding the assignment as well. Also, we have few of students are absent, so I didn't want to do a classroom activity as such because of that. Also, um, are you clear with what we discussed today?
Quite okay, Pasindu.
All right. So I'll be online for about another 10-15 minutes more. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to help. If not, we can wrap it up and call it a day. I'll see you next week. Okay. Thank you for joining, guys.
Thanks, Pasindu. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pasindu.
Have a nice day, guys.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Pasindu, can we please go back to the first assignment again?
Sure. First assignment as in group assignment or?
The group assignment, yeah.
Okay. Give me a minute. Let me share my screen.